Welcome to Radio B2B, the only truly free, unbiased and open internet radio platform for business in Africa.
I'm very pleased to be joined on the line now by Tanya Kabalin, who's founder of Olikira, South Africa, and she's presenting at the SAPEX conference between the 4th and the 7th of June, and her topic is the golden link, unleashing the potential of the supply chain. Tanya, thank you so much for joining me.
It's my pleasure, Ivor. Thank you very much for having me.
Have you spoken at SAPEX conferences before?
This is my first time. I'm thoroughly looking forward to it because I've been linked to SAPEX for a while, but it's my first opportunity to join their conference.
All right, so I'm going to be relatively rude to you and say that this, as I read your topic, it sounds like a very sort of wishy-washy kind of a topic. Is it anything like wishy-washy?
I'm hoping not, because we're getting to the heart of how we can ignite some growth in the South African economy and the role that the supply chain can play in that. It's a role that is undervalued, I think, in our current economy, and a group of people who could add a lot more than they are at the moment. So when we get to speaking about it, it's going to be anything but wishy-washy, I hope.
When you say undervalued, is that possibly because supply chain itself doesn't really have an identity as an industry or as a sector?
To a degree, I think that does play a role, and I think organizations like SAPEX and the international arm of that, APEX, are playing a big role in changing that. But within an organization, I think generally speaking, they hold a lower tier recognition than perhaps some of the sexier departments like your marketing, your sales, your finance. And as a result, they end up being underleveraged.
That's a very interesting observation, particularly in a country where procurement in particular and keeping with things like the Public Finance Management Act and the notion of what good governance is, seems to be what's got us into trouble in this country to such a very large extent. And certainly supply chain issues, particularly of procurement, particularly of good governance in terms of tendering processes, are issues which are supposed to be watertight and professionally guaranteed and shepherded into the average company, but particularly listed companies in South Africa. Do we, as a country, as an economy, take supply chain seriously to the extent that it has a seat at the table when it comes to the boardroom?
I don't believe that we do, no. I think often supply chain is represented by another function, often the COO type of role. But if we had a direct voice for the supply chain at board level, I think we would see a material change, not just in the governance and ethics that you bring up, but actually in the business performance and results that South African companies return.
So who's to blame for this problem? Is it all the other industries that are really keeping their thumb very, very neatly on supply chain practitioners and saying, we don't want to give you that seat at the table? Or is it in fact the supply chain practitioners themselves who say, well, we really don't have the kind of self-concept that will allow us to be articulate and advocate our own sort of place under the sun?
I'm not sure that you can ascribe a blame on any particular side of it, but what I would like to see happening is the supply chain profession standing up and being counted more. We could sit here and we could point fingers perhaps at them being held out of the boardroom by other more effective industries or functions within an organization, but I don't think that moves us forward. I think what moves us forward is a supply chain that recognizes its value, recognizes the worth that it can bring to an organization, and then stands up and gets counted. Organizations that have achieved that see fundamental shifts in their business results.
Why do you say that? What characterizes them as excellent in comparison to the also-rans?
I think what happens when you bring a supply chain function to the boardroom is that you recognize that this is a function which touches every single part of an organization. It's probably the only function that does particularly touch every single part, excluding, of course, things like human resources. It's also a function which employs the majority of people in an organization. Often it's actually responsible for the highest amount of cost being spent, as well as the investments, if you think of the big asset investments that need to be done. So therefore it begs the question, if you're running an organization, why wouldn't you have that function at the boardroom table? Why wouldn't you bring that strategic insight in, that span of control in, that cultural influence within an organization? And this function has significant exposure and interaction with your client and your customer. But I think there is a historic way of thinking about the supply chain, Ivor, which gets in the way occasionally, which is, do we look at the supply chain through the eyes of a master-slave relationship, where they just do what they get told and their focus is operational? Or do we view the supply chain as a strategic partner in setting business direction and driving business results? When we change our lens as an organization to the latter, we give a platform to those incredibly important people in the supply chain to be a partner in the delivery of business results. But that's not happening uniformly in all organizations at the moment.
What is it that you're hoping that a listener to your talk is going to walk away thinking?
Given that the majority of people who are going to be there are supply chain professionals, I'm hoping that they're going to walk away understanding their value better. I'm hoping they walk away with an impetus and momentum to take a bigger role in the organization. And I'm hoping that they'll be armed with an understanding of exactly where it is that they can impact the overall organization. In 20 minutes that we have to do it, or maybe 40 minutes and we've got some Q&A, I don't think we're going to move the needle. But if I can get some confidence in the importance of the supply chain, and that the people, 1,000 people who leave there, go back into their organizations and start thinking and speaking differently about the role that they play, hopefully we start changing some mindsets.
Tanya, is this a problem which is endemic to South Africa because of the nature of maturity or possibly the lack of maturity of economic development? Or, in fact, is it a pervasive problem around the world?
I think it's the latter. I've had the opportunity in my career to run supply chains as well as some of the other departments like marketing and sales internationally, and with a particular focus in Northwest Europe. That's going back about 10 years ago now when I first went into that foray, and I saw exactly the same thing. If I went back there now today, 10 years on, I think I would see some movement beyond what we're seeing in South Africa. But that is fairly common, I think you'll know, across most of our functions. But therefore, I don't think this is a South African problem. This is much more of a business ethos problem, and you'll find the problem anywhere you go in the world.
As far as the APIX standards are concerned, and SAPIX, if you want, as the main agent for excellence in the supply chain sector within South Africa, do you think that sufficient is being done to recognize the quality of the people who work in the sector?
I think more can be done. I think, as I said before, APIX and SAPIX as their local agent are doing significant work in raising the profile of this function. And as a result, we start getting the recognition, the reward, and therefore the retention of these vital skills within South Africa. But I think we're at the beginning of that journey, Ivor. I think there's a lot further to go.
Fantastic. Well, Tanya Kabalin, I look forward to attending your talk at the conference and listening to you speak. So thank you so much for giving me the time.
Thank you, Ivor.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
The Radio B2B Weekly News Review.